Hi, Dave Littman, Truth in IT. Welcome to today's webcast. Today we've got a 360 view where we are talking about how to secure the enterprise supply chain. Today we are featuring two companies, LeoStream and Lineage. I'll get to them in a second, but before we go to Mike Matchett with LeoStream, first, a few housekeeping tips. We expect today's event to probably go about maybe 35, 40, maybe 45 minutes, and of course, we will be taking your questions and comments in the chat room. We have staff standing by from both vendors to answer questions you may have about today's content, and staff standing by from Truth in IT to answer any questions you might have about the video or the audio or anything like that, as well as our gift card shopping spree giveaway. We are giving away 10 $100 gift card shopping sprees, and here's how that works. Towards the end of today's event, we will display an image directly over the video feed that looks like this. When you see it, click on it. It'll take you to a page that looks like this. Just click the enter button. You'll find out immediately whether or not you've won, and whether you have or you haven't. Come back. We're running these events all the time. We're going to try to do these 360 views on a monthly basis throughout the year. We're going to probably try to speak with anywhere from 2 to 6 vendors in a specific space throughout the event, and some of the events might go longer than an hour, but in any case, today's event I don't think will go much longer than 45 minutes. So while Mike is getting set up with LeoStream, just a little bit more about them. LeoStream focuses on vendor access and third-party access. You know, we all have vendors and contractors that we work with, and securing their access to our data and infrastructure is quite a bit different than securing that for typical employees. So that's where Mike is going to focus on with that conversation with LeoStream, and then we're going to switch over to securing the software development stack, especially as it relates to open source, and that conversation will go forward with Lineage. So stand by. I am now going to pass things over to Mike at LeoStream. We'll take a brief break after that, just a couple seconds to get lined up with Lineage, and then I'll be back later with the giveaway. So Mike, take it away.
Hi, Mike Matchett with Small World Big Data, and I am here today talking with LeoStream again, and we're talking about something interesting. It's about how you might give access to everyone who needs access to your network, but they might not necessarily all be employees. You know a lot about your employees, but what about those vendors? What about those providers? What about those people trying to do integration tasks for you? Maybe you've got some remote admins. Maybe you've got some other people who need temporary access to your network. How do you manage that in a zero trust way? Hang on and we'll get right into it. Hey Karen, welcome back to our show. We've talked to LeoStream in the past, but it's been a while. What's going on?
Well, first, Mike, let me say thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure to talk with you. And well, what's going on? There's some big and exciting things happening at LeoStream. You know, we've been around for 20 plus years, and we've always been focusing on these remote desktop access use cases for corporate environments and their employees. And now we're taking all that knowledge and we're simplifying it, and we're really going laser focused on vendor privileged access management, all about making sure that organizations can have really secure lockdown access for third parties without sharing credentials and without opening a hole, I should say, in your corporate VPN.
All right, let's talk about third-party vendors, because there's lots of parties involved here. I just want to be clear for the folks involved, since we're doing this with words. We've got a company who might use LeoStream and might have gateways to get from one site to another, from one part of their enterprise to another part of their enterprise, out to where their employees are, and that's sort of the normal use of your product, the remote desktop kind of ability to avoid using VPNs and avoid doing security holes and doing all that great zero trust stuff. What we're talking about here, when you say vendor, you're talking about for that company, their vendors, right?
Right. So if let's take a media and entertainment company, right? I've got production engineers who are part of my organization, and they authenticate through my corporate identity provider. I know who they are. I know which resources they have access to. You can use our gateway to give them secure access even while they're remote, but it's still my employee. So they're allowed to navigate through the data files and do their jobs. But now let's say I have a contractor. I've got so much work. I need to have a contractor who's a video production editor. And I need to give them access to the editing system so they can help collaborate on products. But I don't want to wrap them in necessarily to my corporate identity providers. I don't want to give them access to all the different systems and data. I don't want to have VPN connections. Maybe I want to make sure they're going into a different cloud region. I need to manage that person differently than I do my employee.
All right, so you've got what we might call a supply chain of IT vendors going on there sometimes. So you've got people who might have provided you hardware needing to come in and do something, people who might do tasks for you occasionally, people who might do support things for you. But more and more, we're using remote workers, we're using contractors, we're offloading a lot of that from our own staff, but managing that can be really hard. And we talk about security and access, that's really a problem, right? I can't just give everyone the VPN and the secure keys to everything. I certainly don't want to give them the passwords to everything.
Right. And that's kind of one of the keys right there is you need to make sure that your secure credentials, an organization's secure credentials, need to not leak out of that organization. If you remember from I think it was 2013, there was Target got hacked. Target got hacked because their vendor, an HVAC vendor, got hacked. And that hack of the HVAC vendor allowed Target, a malicious actor, to actually hack into Target. And so if that HVAC vendor had been more properly managed as far as what their access is into the Target environment, that wouldn't have happened in the first place.
Yeah, we could talk about similar incidents that have happened, especially with MSPs and things where there's a central point among lots of third parties, and if you give one third party access, then the world might have it if they get hacked, and that's so the key is just to not then give out those credentials, to not expose them. So how do we? So I mean that's just sort of presupposed. So how do we use LeoStream then? What are you guys working up with your IP here to address this problem of folding in third-party vendors into the security domain without giving them the keys?
So what we're working on is what we're calling the LeoStream Privileged Remote Access Service. And in its first incarnation here, we're focusing on that vendor privileged access management, which is really in many cases a very simplified workflow for remote access. I just need to make sure that the vendors can request access to the specific resources they need to maintain or operate on. And I need to make sure that the credentials for those resources never leak out to the vendor. And then I need to audit everything that the vendor is doing. So things like session recording, audit level tracking of when they log in, things like that. So that's what LeoStream is providing, is a service that makes those three things very easy to do. And we're doing it in a unique way, which is we're taking the gateway, the LeoStream gateway that's part of our desktop access platform, and we retooled it so that organizations can use that LeoStream gateway now for their vendor remote access. So this means that they can use the LeoStream service to really lock down authentication and the requesting and the approving and denying of access. And then the access itself, the desktop traffic, the server traffic, whatever it happens to be, goes through the customer's hosted gateway, never through the LeoStream network. So the customer is always in control of their data.
Right. So security, control, and visibility. We got the kind of pillars that you're building there for VPAM. And just to be clear, if I'm an enterprise and I have LeoStream gateways already for what I'm normally doing, this looks like another LeoStream gateway in some respects, but it's external for vendors to use. And
Correct.
But how do vendors find that? How do they get on?
Well, they don't need to know anything about it. So
okay.
A LeoStream customer gets their own vanity URL, mycompany.leostreamvpam.com, and their vendors then go to that URL, and they don't know what gateway they're going through. They don't know where the resource they're connecting to lives, if it's data center, if it's in the cloud. They don't know the credentials for it. They simply click a little view button on it, and then they have an in-browser connection. Again, and that could be SSH to a Linux server, it could be VNC to a Mac, it could be RDP to a Windows machine, but they have an in-browser connection where they can do their work, and that work is recorded so that the LeoStream customer, they always know what's going on. So
Right.
yeah, it's transparency for the vendor, it's audit level tracking for the organization, and it's securing the credentials and data.
All right. So, and this is interesting too, because there's a little subtle shift here. It's like the clients that are deploying this, that want their vendors to come in and work there, they're not having to stand up a service for the vendors to broker through to find this. You're providing that part of the service where the third-party vendors can connect to one URL. You can say give them vanity URLs, but it's one place, and that you'll point them to that customer's thing. So you kind of front door this in a way that's kind of nice, but you're not interjecting yourself in the data stream at all. That remote desktop gets served directly back.
Correct. That's exactly correct. Yeah, the one key for us was to keep it simple. You really want to simplify IT's task of onboarding vendors, indicating who can access what, making it easy for them to reject connections and track everything that's going on. And that's all done through the hosted platform that we provide.
All right, and this is a remote desktop. So when you say you can record all this and play it back at a later date if there's security problems, you're not just getting the keystrokes going across. You're actually seeing the desktop that person was using while they're doing it. So
yeah, it is essentially a recording of the console. So if you let someone SSH into it, then it's a recording of the SSH console. If it's an RDP connection, it's whatever's going on their virtual screen there.
Yeah, and to be clear, the RDP credentials, the SSH credentials never end up in the vendor's hands. That's something that's handled by LeoStream within that connection. So it keeps it hands off, and you're not exposing those to be hacked or passed on in any way.
Correct. But the recordings never end up in our hands. They're sensitive data, and
so the recordings also don't end up in your hands. Okay.
Yeah, the recordings aren't in our hands. The recordings aren't in the vendor's hands. They belong to the LeoStream customer who signed up as wants to use this service.
So very secure, probably very compliant all around and everything, and you be able to check off those things. Lots of people have this third-party vendor challenge, and they end up treating them either as temporary employees or giving them almost the equivalent of root privileges for a short time, and then forgetting about cleaning up afterwards. And from my experience, having looked at LeoStream products before, you can actually set windows of time that those permissions that you're granting are good for. So someone can only have them have that connection for only 2 days or a day or whatever it is. There are other things that people could sort of manipulate there as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, it's definitely time of day access. That's very important. Vendors have the LeoStream customer indicates which resources vendors are allowed to access, but then the vendor can only access it during the specific window that they requested. And the LeoStream customer, the IT admin for that organization, can edit the windows. They can shorten it if they want. They can kick somebody out if they think that the vendor should be done.
All right, so you got a lot of controls. It's really some interesting stuff in where that's going, this just really augments the larger set of gateways that you already have for remote desktop access, which I hear a lot. Just as a side, I hear a lot of people saying, "Hey, VPNs are not something we should be using anymore." In that sense, right? We should be doing something much stronger than that. And so, when we come to vendors, we probably shouldn't be giving them VPNs either, right? We should be doing something.
Definitely not. Definitely not. And the thing too, like our remote desktop access platform, it is very feature rich, which means it satisfies a lot of use cases. And you could use it for vendor privileged access management, but it's going to take you a little time to set up and manage. And why do that when you now have this hosted service, which within an hour, minutes, you can have your vendors onboarded and your VPN replaced with our security gateway, and your vendors up and running.
And doing very targeted tactical things rather than spending a lot of time setting up the whole strategy of how you want to deal with vendors in the larger sense, right?
Right.
It's a turnkey kind of way to say, I can enable vendors. I won't even say tomorrow. I can enable vendors in an hour by deploying just this external VPN gateway in addition to my other LeoStream gateways in my environment. So
exactly.
Very cool, Karen. I'm sure you've got some more things coming along. You wanna tell us anything about the future? What do you predict is going to happen with this year with that?
Oh, so much stuff. No, it's very exciting. We are getting ready to introduce this service to the world. And once it's out there, we want to start gathering feedback and adding in functionality that the market tells us is what they need in there. But one of the things that we already know we want to do is, once we have these recordings, is look for ways to leverage AI to analyze the recordings and train it to look for malicious behavior and make automated alerts if it notices something that's going on that shouldn't be going on. And that way you have that extra security.
We weren't going to get out of this conversation without mentioning AI opportunities at least once in here. So yeah, definitely a lot going on in the AI space. And I definitely see if you've got this full log, this full recording session, this can be parsed any number of ways, and it wouldn't actually take all that much. And I'm not putting this burden on you to start identifying malicious patterns and behavior and doing some proactive alerting with AI on top of that as it goes.
It's not my burden; it's my developer's burden. So I'll let them know.
So we'll have you come back and show us that here. Show us that here pretty soon. So tell us, if someone's now got their interest piqued, they've got this challenge. Everyone has this challenge. I don't know if they realize it. How do I give my supply chain of IT people, my suppliers and vendors of my stuff that I normally have to give access to, the right access and limited access and compliant access? Where would you have them look? What would you have them start researching into, or how would they take the next steps here?
Well, I think the best thing to do would be to drop us a line. You can just email us at info@leostream.com. I see the emails that go to info.leostream.com even. So I will point you to the right people, and we'll get you started.
All right. Thank you so much. Hope to have you back soon. Show us some more of this gateway stuff. It's very thought provoking. It just starts to wrap up all the corner cases of zero trust, because I think people have been saying zero trust, but they haven't really gone through their entire list of everything that needs to be handled. And one of these things is third-party vendors. So it's good to see a solution for this. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
All right. Take care, folks, and check out LeoStream.
All right, great job, Mike. Thank you very much, and many thanks to LeoStream and Karen Gondoli for taking part in today's first segment of our 360 view. And now we are going to hand things over to Mike Matchett. Again, now he will be speaking with Nick Mistry, who is Senior Vice President and CISO with Lineage. So Mike, I'm going to pass things over to you. You can take it away, and then I'll be back after this with the giveaway. Mike?
Hi, Mike Matchett with Small World Big Data, and we're here today talking, of course, about security. And one of the main problems that people are having with securing their own apps and identifying all the problems with them is they tend to leverage a lot of different components, a lot of different open source. They leverage a lot of opaque projects. Dependency chains of those things can go down hundreds of layers in some cases. How do you ensure that when you're building something and putting out there on the internet and you're leveraging open source packages, or even using COTS stuff with the packages, that it's safe, that it's not introducing risk? Well, we've got Lineage here today. We're going to talk a little bit about how you can secure your environment, particularly understand everything in your dev supply chain. So hold on a second. Hey, Nick, welcome to our show.
Hey, Mike, thank you for having me.
Before we dive into Lineage, which kind of gives it away a little bit of what we're going to be talking about, you're the CSO for Lineage. Tell us a little bit about how you became a CSO and how you got to looking at open source code this way. What drew you into this end of the market?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Prior to joining Lineage, I worked within the CISO organizations of several large companies, and managed vulnerability management, cloud security, application security, ran the full automation of DevSecOps, CI/CD pipelines, testing, and then also shifting left, security champions, you name it, right? I was really driving kind of the forefront of automation around security and application security in particular. However, I couldn't get away from the feeling that even with all of this advancement in technology, we were still playing whack-a-mole with a lot of
Mm.
the security vulnerabilities. And then Log4j happened, or Log4Shell, and that really kind of broke my back, right? And I after that incident, I spent about 6 months just really researching what was in our software, what was going on in open source, why was it so hard to find, where Log4j existed and then remediate it. And that started my journey here into the open source world and really diving into the challenges and risks of open source. And then, had the opportunity to meet with the co-founder and CEO of Lineage. And, we worked together on building the concept out further. And 6 months after we started talking, I joined Lineage.
All right. For those who are maybe not as familiar with history, Log4j, open source package for logging, it was in everything, right? It's in everything. Everybody just says, oh, I'm not going to rewrite that. I'm just going to import that and bring it in. But that's not even really the extent of the problem, because it's in everything that's in everything that's in everything, right? It's baked in at many levels of that dependency chain of any open source package. And how many levels deep do you need to go to really find all the instances of it is a question. People who do open source development probably don't even know how many packages are including the same stuff going way down and down and down, do they?
Yeah, no, that's absolutely correct. And we call these nested dependencies. And as you said, we can see sometimes hundreds of layers of nested dependencies, which are typically opaque, right? And one of the key tenets of security is having an accurate inventory of everything you have. So really starting to understand that. And one of the things that we found is that it's incredibly hard to actually find the entire lineage, if you will, like the lineage of your company, of your software is the name of the company is incredibly hard. And so, we started there. We started with what we call crawlers, similar to how Google crawls the web and indexes it. We crawl open source and learn everything we can about open source packages, as well as making sure we have the full dependency tree or lineage of that software.
Yeah, and lest anybody like forget this aspect as well, when you use something like Log4j in your open source software and it's using it, it's not necessarily using a single version down throughout the whole thing. There's multiple versions in multiple places, even in the one application. And so you're also having to track the different versions. And to do that, and it becomes very complex very quickly to even find a vulnerability and then to know what to do to fix it. So let's dive a little bit into Lineage. When you go to look at an open source package for somebody, what's the first thing you really need to do?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. So the first thing we do is when let's say there's open source package A in your software, we will then go scan the source code of open source package A. So let's say it lives somewhere in open source on a repo somewhere. We'll actually scan that source code.
Yeah.
We'll also capture all the metadata around that package, who's contributing, what's the contributor frequency, how well maintained is it, age of all the components. And then we scan the actual source code for risk. So we identify about 170 different dimensions of risk. And then we have a unique fingerprinting technology, which looks at not only creating signatures, but we also look at vector-based analysis so that we know that every component in that software is what it says it is, and it comes from a good, known, and valid source. And we do this not only looking at source code, but we also look at what is produced as a package, right? So sometimes a package is a binary artifact, and a lot of times what we've seen is the bad guys are putting in a change in the build. So between the source code and the actual package that's built, they'll insert something that ends up in the package but not readily viewable in the source code. And so we're doing all of that analysis, and then we're actually executing the software so we understand not only its behaviors, but all of these open source components make calls to other open source components.
Yeah, that nested problem you were saying, right?
Exactly. And being able to identify which calls they're making and how they're making is really also part of the risk analysis. And so we're doing that as well. And then once we identify all of its dependencies, let's say A1, A2, we will go to A1, crawl it, do that whole process again, and do it for its dependencies until we exhaust the entire supply chain.
I mean, that's like web crawling. It's very recursive, but you don't know where the end necessarily is going to end up, right?
That's right.
You could be pretty, pretty far down, but someone's got to do it. You got to actually trace that. It's interesting that you partially execute the packages too, because I think a lot of people might say, well, we'll fingerprint the source code, maybe we'll fingerprint the binaries, and then we'll say, like, we'll let you authenticate when you download something, the binary fingerprint. You can do that
Right.
with a bunch of tools. But to actually understand that there might be a difference between those is pretty cool. You mentioned risk dimensions. What are some of the interesting dimensions of risk that would make having to do something take action on it? What would make it would say, hey, this risk is too much. I have to do something.
No, absolutely. So obviously vulnerabilities and known vulnerabilities is the first place, right? And
Mm.
everybody's focused on that. The second is looking at the code quality itself. So are there other exploitable risks that are not CVEs or known vulnerabilities, but somebody could use to exploit in that open source to compromise your software? So we look at the code quality. We look for, are there unsigned binaries in the code? We also look at age of components. So maybe
Mm.
your open source package is up to date, but its dependencies are very old. They're not using the latest versions. Those are other things that would also indicate risk of the overall package. And so we're really looking at all of these pieces. The other thing that we look at is it well maintained, right? And not only how well is it maintained as a package, but also all of its dependencies. How well are all the dependencies maintained? And then look for potential risk that way. And then we aggregate or create a composite score of, let's say, the reputation, if you will, of that open source.
Yeah. So there is, obviously all the details. You can end up with pages and pages of stuff. Is there any way to get a higher level view of what's going on to sort of summarize that?
Yeah, absolutely. And so one of the things that we developed was a software supply chain risk profile, which
Mm.
is basically a graph. The x-axis of the graph, if you're looking at it as like a grid, the x-axis of the graph is what we call inherent risk. So those are things that are inherently risky in the code itself and the software itself. Vulnerabilities, we talked about the age, we also talked about code quality. Those types of things are on, that we're graphing out on the x-axis. The y-axis looks at integrity risk. So what we're doing with integrity is making sure every component that's there is a good is from a good known source, and what it has matches that good known source. And we're looking for any evidence of tamper. So again, we talked about matching what was in source to what's in the package binary and so forth, of making sure there aren't any changes between those that may lead to some type of evidence of tamper risk. So we do both
All right.
integrity and then inherent risk.
So that's a nice high level view. Now, say we identify some things that should be fixed, and there's a lot of tools out there that might get to some list of things and prioritize the list and say, hey, these are the bigger security vulnerabilities. These are the least ones. Here's your punch list. Go to work, and there's 1,000 things on the list. Um, can you do better than that? I know you've got some planning tools in there. How do you help someone really balance the idea of maintaining everything as current as it possibly can versus the idea of introducing new problems and breaking the software they already have? Uh, you have to, I mean, you know what I'm saying? You have to balance that stability of the application
Yeah.
versus the vulnerability of that application. How do you help someone do that?
No, absolutely, and that's a great question. It's been actually a journey for us to get here. When we first started, we would provide all of these information and risks and vulnerabilities, and our customers said, "This is great, but I really don't know what to do with all of this." And then we moved to, okay, let's give you some recommendations. Then our customers like, "Oh, this is great, but our developers actually can't implement these." And then we spent some time really digging in, like, why is it so challenging? And we learned a lot of things, and we created we developed an AI set of AI capabilities to produce what we call plans, fixed plans. And really they're categorized in three different types of plans. The first plan is what we call the compatible plan. And what we're doing with compatible plans is we're looking at all the vulnerabilities, we're looking at your entire stack, so everything from the OS all the way to the application layer, and identifying fixes that will not break your software. What we found is what was challenging for many of our customers was, adopting or using the latest version of something ended up breaking their software, and they actually didn't know why, right? And they would spend a lot of cycles trying to fix it, but instead they would just abandon that fix because it was just so hard based on all the other issues that it caused. So the compatible plan really looks at all of your vulnerabilities, looks at your entire stack, and proposes changes or upgrades. Let's say you have a vulnerability. Open source package version 10 is the latest version and remediates those vulnerabilities. However, version 10 may break your software and also may introduce new vulnerabilities you were not aware of. So our compatible plan basically looks at what's the best set of changes, removing the most vulnerabilities without breaking your software or introducing new vulnerabilities. So we could, what we will do is say, okay, version 8 might be better. It remediates the vulnerabilities and it doesn't break your software. Go with version 8. Now we do this for the whole stack. So we're giving you all of these compatible fixes in one plan. So you could have maybe 10, 20 of those. Now you can deal with all 20 fixes in one fell swoop, if you will, because you know it won't break your software. The second plan,
Yeah, I was gonna say, what if there is no compatible fix?
yeah. Yeah, no, that's a good question. So often what we'll find is we'll create what we call a minor plan, which is beyond the compatible plan, which basically says, look, there are fixes available for these vulnerabilities. However, we know there's conflicts, meaning that if you deploy it, it will break your software. And basically, what we do there is we identify where the conflicts are, we identify the fixes, and we give developer instructions integrated into Jira so they know how to handle these what I would say incompatible fixes, right? Instead of simply discovering that during testing and it breaking your software and having to rewrite it, we actually give all of that up front. So now you can plan for building these fixes that require developers to act upon.
All right, or Nick, there's still a problem here. What if that open source package is old and obsolete or not being maintained anymore?
Yeah.
Are you recommending? How can someone even address that?
No, and that's a great question. So what we're finding is there are a significant number of open source packages that are not maintained or not well maintained, right? And they are vulnerable, and the likelihood of them producing a fix for them is pretty low. In those instances, what we will do is we'll fork, branch, fix that open source package and contribute it back to you as a fixed version, and we will maintain it on behalf of our customers. So really, between the compatible plan, what we call that minor plan, and fixing and forking and fixing unfixed vulnerabilities, we are getting to 100% zero vulnerabilities for our customers in this way.
All right, so you'll even fix the open source package in some way, create that.
Right.
And I mean, are you good guys? Are you passing back those fixes to the rest of the open source community, or are you keeping those for your clients only?
So absolutely, we pass those back to the open source community, where they'll accept it. And a lot of times, as you mentioned, one of the challenges with open source is that's not well maintained. There isn't an active ecosystem. So in those situations, right, we will provide it to our customers directly as well. So that's how we deal it. But our goal is to improve the entire ecosystem.
All right, so let's get back. Now, if someone does this and you get to zero vulnerabilities, and you said you had some graphs before. Is this something somebody can use to certify compliance and use in their other regulatory kinds of things where they have to prove that they're, go back to their own CISOs or their own board and say, we've covered the angles on this?
No, absolutely. So, what we call continuous compliance is pretty important, right? And so we built what we call compliance packs into the solution so we can provide all the evidence and artifacts necessary to say you are compliant, with the right specs, including, the vulnerability remediation. So that's all built into the software. Again, the goal is to get you end to end, everything from understanding all the risks, what kinds of risks, remediating them, and then being able to certify that it is remediated.
Right. And I guess we'll just sort of kind of getting towards wrapping up, but if you could just give me an example of someone who's used this, you can talk generically if you like, but just what is it that they're saving in hard dollars? And obviously if you get to zero risk, you're saving all your risk, but how does this help someone justify investing in it?
No, that's a great question. So I can give you an example for one of our customers. we had cited an external research report, and it kind of lined up to what they were seeing is on average, large enterprises are spending about $28,000 a year in developer time in remediating vulnerabilities. Through us, that amount of time almost dropped to zero because of the compatible plan. They didn't have to do any actions. The incompatible were drastically reduced. They can plan for them. So that was like almost a 40% efficiency gain. Then obviously fixing the unfixed vulnerabilities, I mean, that you can't even measure because they would not have been able to fix it before. But that's not only the cost savings there. We found a tremendous amount of cost savings because the traditional AppSec team no longer had to do all of the analysis and prioritization and also determining contextual factors and the back and forth between AppSec and the dev teams that typically go on and negotiating, what's a priority, what's not a priority. All of that, usually took, at least in this one customer example, for a set of critical and high vulnerabilities, it usually took about 6 months really to hash out, right? Because it's pretty complex to do fixes. With our solution, they were able to do it in about a week. So it was a dramatic savings, not only in time, effort, and resources, but then achieving results happened in a much shortened cycle.
It reminds me of we talk a lot about zero trust on this channel. We've talked about it with lots of different companies, but now we're going to introduce a new term, zero defects, right? and so if you can actually get to zero defects and it's a believable, achievable goal, that would be, to me, as important or even more important than zero trust in a lot of ways. Like you close off this whole other avenue, like the back wall of the building is now also secure, right? It's not just the front doors, it's the walls are secure and tight. If someone, Nick, wants to find out more about what Lineage does, or maybe how it could help them in their environment, someplace special on your website or anything, what would you point them to?
No, absolutely. Obviously lineage.com, we have plenty of information on our website. And there's a button there to say, set up a demo or a free consultation, and we'll set one up very quickly. And the good news is, we can do this with your own software, and you can see the risks and how we can remediate it, within, minutes, if you will, of integrating. Or you can send an email to sales@lineage.com as well.
All right, and check that out. So folks, zero defects, it's going to be the next big thing after zero trust. You got to also batten down the hatches on your own software. Check out Lineage. Thank you, Nick, for being here today.
Thank you, Mike. Appreciate
All right,
it.
Take care, folks. See you next time.
All right, great job, Mike, and thank you very much, Nick, for supporting today's event. Many thanks to Lineage. Many thanks again to Karen Gondoli with LeoStream as well. Of course, thank you all for coming today. We greatly appreciate it. And on behalf of the whole Truth in IT team, as well as LeoStream and Lineage and Mike Matchett at Small World Big Data, thank you again for coming. I'm Dave Littman at Truth in IT. Let's put up the giveaway. Good luck with that, everyone. Thank you again. We want to wish you all a great day ahead.